Okay. Hello. Today is August 23rd, 2019. I'm meeting today with Mr. Nathan Stiewig at his home in Fort Collins, Colorado. My name is Brad Hoops. I'm the interviewer for the Northern Colorado Veterans History Project. Welcome, Nate, and thanks for sitting down today to tell your story.
Okay, thank you. Well, I'll start at the beginning.
Go ahead, fire away.
When the war broke out,
Well, let's even go further back than that. Let's start out with talk a little bit about your early childhood. Tell us where you were born, your date of birth, and a little bit about your family.
okay, I was born in Roseburg, Oregon, 1924. My dad was working in construction. He was a plasterer. In those days, any house that was worth anything was plastered. We didn't use wallboard. Now you never see plastering. So, well, just to make this short, but he was working on a school building at a town near Roseburg, and he slipped and fell and broke his neck. And I can remember a friend of ours was a chiropractor, and he heard about this. My dad's name was, he went by Bill. And he says, "Bill, come on in, I'll fix you up." Well, my dad went in, he took an x-ray, and he wouldn't touch him. It just came that close to breaking the spinal cord there in the back. Now, I'm only saying this is because that quite impacted us. He got workman's compensation, but after 6 months he was asked to come in and be evaluated, and he says, "Well, I certainly can't go back doing what I'm doing." He says, "Oh, well, you could get a job as an elevator operator," and he stopped the commission. That was after about 6 weeks. But anyway, that made living kind of tight, so folks had to live on their savings.
Well, on top of that, a question I always like to ask your generation: how did the Great Depression affect your family? Were you affected by that much?
Well, the Depression, of course, we all felt it. But I don't know, my dad was he was well known in our little town, and he worked pretty regularly. I think maybe he took on a few little extra jobs. My mother wanted to go to work. She really liked waitressing at a hotel or something. My dad didn't like that. He didn't want her to do that. And so that's how, one other thing I mentioned, towards the end of the Depression, why my grandparents were gone, and they had a cow. And so my folks had a couple of lots near our house, and so they decided to take the cow over. And he fenced those lots, and we had a cow there. And of course, that was milk and cream, and occasionally a calf, and so on. So that kind of helped out a little bit too. And I went to high school, and I was a good student. I was 8th in my class of 84, and I enjoyed my time in high school. And I can then after I started working with my dad on summers, but plastering is really heavy work. And so I did that, and then started in college. And I graduated in 1942. And I worked with my dad that summer, but I wanted to go to college. And so I started making plans for that. In fact, I can remember one of the general contractors for whom my dad worked as I was getting older, he says, Bill, you ought to start putting aside a little money so Nate can go to college. And my dad says, we've already started that.
Wow.
I thought that was kind of nice.
Yeah.
And, of course, going to college, well, I think you mentioned here December 7th, 1941.
I was going to ask you where you were and what you remember.
It was on a Sunday afternoon.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember just going downtown to kind of bum around with some of my friends. And, I used to belong to a drum and bugle corps, and he was one of the buglers. But at this time, he was working as a bellhop at one of the leading hotels in town. So we just went along to say hello to him, and he told us about the Japs bombing Pearl Harbor. And that was the first we heard about it. And at that time, I didn't know where Pearl Harbor was. I thought it was in Alaska. So I went to go home to tell my folks about this. And I got home, and my mother was taking a nap. And I woke her up and says, the Japs have bombed Pearl Harbor. I was all excited about it. I could see she wasn't excited. She could see what's coming.
Yeah.
And she was a kind of a worrying type of person. I can remember when some big decision, her pacing the floor, wringing her hands. She was that kind of person. Mm-hmm. So that, I guess.
What did you think about that? Here you are, a boy, a man coming of age. Did you think you were going to get pulled into this thing, or what were your thoughts on?
Oh, I was not right immediately, but as things went on, I realized, well, I'm probably going to be called into it too. Mm. But I really didn't want to be drafted. And when I went to college, they had various programs with the military to go to school and so on. The Navy had a couple of really good programs, but I didn't want to go in the Navy. But the Army had ones called the Enlisted Reserve Corps. And I thought about that for a while and decided that I would enlist in that Enlisted Reserve Corps. So 1942 was a big year for me. Graduated from high school, went to college, and then I enlisted in the Army just within a few months.
Wow.
And after that, in Oregon, I went to the University of Oregon. They were on what we called the term system, fall, winter, spring, and summer. And going up there, a girlfriend of mine, she's also going to college. She knew what I was hoping to do, and she went up for Rush Week, and she joined one of the sororities there, and she came back and says, maybe there's this new arrangement there called a co-op. It's functioned like a fraternity, except we did some of our own work, and it was much less expensive. Mm-hmm. And for instance, we'd mow the lawn and we would wash the dishes and vacuum and that sort of thing. But we had a cook. We didn't do any cooking. So I decided I would try for that. That sounded good to me. So that's what I did. And I don't know if I get things in proper perspective here, but I joined this little group and went on to college, and I was always interested in meteorology. Well, Oregon didn't have any meteorology. In fact, very few schools did at that time. And when I talked to the woman who was trying to get me registered, and she said, well, what are you interested in? I'm interested in meteorology. Well, she didn't know what that was. She thought I was saying mineralogy. Oh. And so she started signing me up for all these geology courses. And I thought, well, gee, I'm not interested in that. So what we kind of did was sign up for the science courses pretty much as the pre-meds had, and that fit. But I had a hard time with those. That was not my forte, really. But that's what I wanted to do, and I did that. And after I'd enlisted, one of our neighbors in Roseburg, when Oregon was granted another representative as a result of the 1940 census, is one of our neighbors, and we knew him really well. So I asked my mother, why don't you call Harris and see if there's somebody that I could contact to get in the meteorology section of the Air Force. So she did that and gave me a contact. And by that time, I was a little into these courses a little bit more, and I thought, gee, if I do this and I foul up, Lord knows where I'm going to end up. So I didn't do anything about that. And then, the spring, I think at the beginning of the winter term, that would be just after the first of the year, we got word that we were going to be called to duty on April the 6th. And so the winter term ended like sometime in March. And so I just went home then to be home. And I got a little job delivering telegrams on my bicycle. You know, that's the way they used to do it. Well, I delivered these telegrams, and I remember I kind of had a connection there. That's how I got that. And I remember on the telegram envelope, they put a star on the back. That was just means that it was bad news, so that we could act appropriately when we delivered it. I thought that was really nice. Well, then...
was that hard to deliver those particular telegrams for you?
No, not particularly.
Okay.
No, I didn't. I mean, I was respectful, but I was pretty young then.
Yeah.
And but I found out that when I was going into active duty, my mother started going to the church every afternoon to pray for me, and she did that I guess every afternoon. And one afternoon, she said a light shone on her shoulders, and she felt warm and relief go through her whole body. And my dad, who was not religious at all, he thought that he lived as like the rest of the people. He would go along with all the rest of them. And he said he was working in his garden all the time. There was no sun breaks at all. So, well, I can't say anything more about that, but that was kind of the start. Well, then, getting ready to go up, I would go into the Fort Lewis for reception, and I would leave from my school. So I went up in the afternoon, and I think went to a movie, but I really couldn't enjoy that movie. And the train we were to catch left like 3 o'clock in the morning. So we went on the train up to Fort Lewis, and that's the first time I'd been out of the state of Oregon.
Wow.
And there it went all right, although just on this break here, but when I was home, I met this girl I liked pretty well, and so I started writing to her up there. Of course, she was lonesome, just left home.
Yeah.
She didn't respond, and I was really hurt by that. And I'm skipping ahead there a little bit. When I came back home after the war, she wanted to get back together again. I declined. I just couldn't face it.
Yeah.
And but we went. I remember not much happening there.
Well, how was that for you, going from your transition, going from a carefree civilian life, now you're in the military, plus maybe a little homesick? How was that transition for you going?
I always felt that the transition was helped a lot by moving away to college beforehand.
Oh, okay.
I was not home
Yeah.
at college, and I always thought that was a good break to start that.
Well, was it much of a transition to go from civilian life into military life and a more restrictive life for you, or?
No, that didn't bother me too much.
Okay.
I went along with that. I remember at Fort Lewis, our only job was occasionally we had to do guard duty at night, and I think that was just a discipline, but we were supposed to look for smoke in case there was a fire. We did this guard duty, and I remember one night, gee, I could see Mount Rainier up there. It was clear, but gee, it was cold walking around there. But then we were to go on the train to go. We knew not where. We were just going someplace on the train, and of course I always liked trains, so that was kind of nice. But I can remember just kind of what feelings are. I remember there was a railroad terminal in northeastern Oregon. Well, it doesn't remember the name of the town is. I remember sitting there while they refilled the engines or whatever they did, and there was guys working around there in their overalls, and I thought, gee, those guys, everything's just gone normal. I don't know what's going to happen to me. I mean, that's kind of the thought that went through my mind.
Sure.
But we went.
Dad?
Just a minute.
Would you want to put in the story about the Life magazine in high school?
Yes. Oh, yeah, maybe I should do that.
Sure.
We'll go back to high school, because this is sort of the beginning of the servers business.
Yeah.
The war was going on, and I happened to go to our library and was looking through Life magazine. Life at that time was kind of a new thing with all the pictures and everything. And there was quite a story in there about General Stilwell and Merrill's Marauders.
Wow.
And some pictures of the Himalaya Mountains also. And I thought, gee, if I have to go, I'd really like to go there.
Wow.
I thought, for one thing, it's a smaller scale, and it's kind of in the backwaters there. And I thought that would be much better in the big battles where you're just cannon fodder. So I thought, gee, I'd sure like to go there. And I thought of praying to go there. And I decided, no, that wasn't the right thing to do. I should just go in and go where I'm needed. So I didn't do anything about that. And
well, that's interesting as we get into your story. Yeah.
yeah, that's the beginning of my story.
Yeah. Wow.
And so then we went on the train and to Camp Walters, Texas.
Oh, wow.
And that, of course, I was mentioned how cold it was. I was doing guard duty. We're all in our woolen uniforms.
Oh, no.
And go down there. Gee, it was hotter. Well, right away we got changed into our khakis there, but that was Camp Walters was it was okay.
But a different environment than what you grew up in.
Oh, yes, it was. But that didn't bother me too much. As long as I had friends there, we could, work together.
And I imagine, too, at that place you met people from New York City and the South, different people than you had grown up with. The people from the East Coast and the Southerners.
Oh, yes. Yeah. Yes. I remember, just as kind of a little side story in this, we was in basic training. And I remember a little young fellow, well, I wasn't old, but he was probably a couple of years younger than I, and he was from Arkansas. He came and says, gee, how could I get in an outfit with horses? And I says, well, you might as well forget it. The Army doesn't have any horses now. I just remembered that. And went to the basic training. That was that was pretty hard because it was hot, and we're in Texas, and I remember after, well, it's not, oh, well, of course, we could go to town occasionally, but it was, the little town was Mineral Wells, and it was so loaded with servicemen there. If you wanted to go to a movie or something, there's a long line. You know, I didn't much like to go to town. I remember towards the latter part of basic training, we had a forced march, 10 miles with full backpack, and it was called to be, I think, I can't remember what it's called, but anyway, we sort of trotted like the people that are, we were supposed to do faster, and it was for 10 miles. I remember we got back there, and about half the guys had to drop out, but I wanted to show that I was doing my best, and I did. And then we called us all to attention, you know, in our platoon. And gee, I could just hardly stand there. My legs were so weak, I could hardly stand there. But we lived through that. And we got to the end, I don't know what to tell this, but I will anyway, end of our basic training. And, one thing, when we started going to the rifle range, they had kind of a mound there, and you could kneel prone to shoot at the targets. I went to get to my mound, there was rattlesnake right across it. Well, they scared that away, we went. But then later on, we got to the mortars, and that was one of the last things of basic training. And with the mortars, there's one fellow, you know, working the mortar shaft, another fellow with binoculars getting the elevation and azimuth readings, and that was etched into the left lens of my glasses. And so I was given the job of that, and I have to back up a little bit. I've had in my life, it's congenital, as long as I can remember, what's called amblyopia. That's a lazy eye, and I didn't see much in this eye. And I was given a physical to go into Oregon, and I just wanted to get in school so bad, so on the eye exam I cheated.
Oh, geez.
You know, you can memorize this.
Right.
I cheated because I wanted to get into college. And so I had to go to my corporal and says, I cannot see that etching. Oh, right away I was pulled off, and because that meant limited service, what they called. And also, about that same time, my mother wrote to my commanding officer and asked why I was in active duty because I have this eye condition.
No.
And, you know, we have physicals every 6 months or so in the Army. And on those, I decided, gee, I better be honest about this. And so I shouted, but they passed me, and I think they thought I was trying to get out of the service by that. And so I realized that, and that's why I was so conscientious with my training. I wanted to show that was not what it was.
Wow.
And so I couldn't see that etching, and my mother had written my commanding officer asking about this. Well, I was called in to talk to him, and he was talking about service and they were going to assign me to a hospital there in Camp Walters. And I could see my mother's letter on his desk. And so her letter and my trouble with the mortars coincided at the same time. Made a pretty convincing thing. So I went back, and that night my sergeant came to me and says, you know, you're scheduled to go to the hospital, but he says, if you'd like, I think I could arrange it for you to stay on here as permanent cadre. Well, that's pretty tempting too at that time. So I asked him, gee, can I just think about that overnight? He says, yes, go ahead. So I thought about it overnight, and it was really tempting because I didn't mind. In fact, I like close order drill, you know, and I wasn't having any problems with that. But I'd always kind of a feeling, gee, if I come across somebody who's badly hurt or bleeding, wouldn't know what to do. And I thought, gee, if I go in the medics, maybe I'd learn something like that. And I finally decided, gee, I think it would be really rewarding to go in that and treat the fellows that had been hurt and come in. So I stayed with the hospital. I went over there. That wasn't easy duty either. We had 12-hour shifts, and we got every other Sunday off. And if they were short during the night, we could get called back in the night for another 6 hours, so that's 18 hours. And I can remember laying there in my bed when they would come in and call the people, hope he goes by me, you know. But he didn't all the time. And I can remember the first time I was called in, and I hadn't been there very long. The ward I was assigned to was the psychopathic ward.
Wow.
And I thought, gosh, I didn't know what I would expect there. But it turned out all right. I didn't have any problems. And so I worked there. At that time, my job was mostly like janitor, polishing the floors and getting the things ready and everything. But it did take, a pulse and temperature of all the patients, I don't know, every 3 or 4 hours, something like that. And I remember one time there was a whack in our ward. And I felt so sorry for her. She was, with all these men there, she was just scared to death. I could tell that looking at her, but nothing happened there. And so I'm trying to.
Well, now, were you getting any formal training, or was it just on the job sort of training?
Just on the job at that point. Yeah. But then after a few months, I was selected to go to training. And one of my friends, I didn't know him real well at that time. Two of us were selected to go, and this was at Fort Sampson Houston in San Antonio. And so we went down there, and I really liked San Antonio. Yeah. Of course, I think we went down in January and came back in April. It was just starting to get hot when we were there. In fact, I can remember.
Is this the part where you were talking about the sergeant came up and said, do you know how you got selected?
Well, that comes in just a little bit. Okay, so it went through that. In fact, somewhere in our boxes, I've still got all the notes I took at that course. But it was very interesting. I liked that. It was very, pretty intense. And so it lasted for 3 months. Went back to Camp Walters, and I was assigned to a ward again, but I was now a medical technician. And I remember a report on the ward, almost the first thing, the nurse asked me to give one of the boys an enema.
Oh, geez.
Well, we learned all about broken legs and broken arms and diseases, but nobody told us how to do it. And so I asked for his cooperation. I didn't know what a man's bottom looked like, and I was afraid I'd hurt him. So I I got everything ready for him and asked him to insert it. So together we did the enema. It worked out all right. I just kind of amusing little story.
Yeah.
And any other incidents? There, I don't think so. Well, I've come to the part Annie was talking about. And then after, I don't know, a couple of months or something like that time, I got word I was going to be transferred out. And I didn't know exactly where I was going then, but when I heard that out, one of the sergeants came up to me. It's one I didn't know at all. I hadn't ever spoken to him before, and I always felt later that he came with a message. Anyway, what he said, I hear you're shipping out. I says, yes, I'm going. He says, you know how they choose the people to go? I said, no, I don't have any idea. He says, well, the captain will get the request for some people. He just turns it over to his company clerk, just like in MASH. Do you ever watch MASH? Well, it wasn't quite that bad, but just turn it. He says he picks them out and gives them to me, and he sends them in. So he picked it. They just needed 2 at this time. So he picked the 2, and the other was my friend Pete Vidmar. So we went together. And I don't know, I always felt somebody was guiding him when he picked out those 2 people. So we went to El Reno, Oklahoma. That's an old cavalry post near, it's called Fort Reno, I think it is. And there were horses there. And I was so surprised. And the thing I remember, it was hot in Oklahoma in the summertime. And with the horses there were just flies, thick flies to cope with. But I liked it there. El Reno, of course, had military there for years and years, and they were used to it, and we felt welcome there, and they were just more friendly people. I liked my time there. And we were there for, I don't know, several weeks or maybe a month or so. And then we were shipped out to go overseas. We took the train to New York City. And I can remember, as I'd mentioned, I hadn't been out of the state of Oregon until I got an arm. I remember going through these big towns, and I would think to myself, you see all these people here? I thought, gee, what keeps all these people straight and narrow here? There can't be a cop on every corner. And I decided because they felt responsible to a higher power. That's the thing I came up with. But anyway, we got to New York, and we didn't know where we were going, you know, we just ended up in New York. And we were there, I think, for maybe a couple of weeks. And I enjoyed New York City.
How was it? Here's a small town boy in New York City. It had to be exciting.
It was exciting. It really was. They had I forgot the name, was something gardens, kind of a dance hall, and they had dancing there. You could go down there each night and dance with the girls, and I had a good time with that. And then it came time to leave, and we were taken to LaGuardia. Turns out we were going to be flown overseas.
Really?
And I was so thankful for that, because I'd never been on an airplane.
Yeah, wow.
But I was so thankful for that, because I thought, gee, if the plane is shot down, you go down and it's all over with. If it torpedoes your boat, you might be floating around there and I just didn't like the water that well. So I was really thankful for that. And the plane was C-54, a four-engine plane to go overseas. And it just had bucket seats on the side. Do you know what they're? It's just a little kind of a square, so your sit bones fit down in the middle of it. It's just made out of aluminum, I expect. And so at nighttime, we'd just take our packs and lay on the floor and sleep on the floor. And I remember laying there and I just thinking, well, as long as I hear those engines going, I'm all right. We stopped, I don't know, it's Gander, Newfoundland, or one of those places in that area for kind of a bite to eat and for to refuel the plane. It was in the middle of the night, 3 o'clock at night or something on that. Then the next stop was over the Atlantic.
Oh, so you didn't go to Greenland or Iceland? You didn't go stop in Greenland or Iceland?
No, I don't think so. We
Went directly
stopped
to-
only once.
Wow.
I don't think it was Iceland. I think it was Gander,
Okay.
but I'm just not
Yeah.
sure
Oh,
about
that's
that.
fine. Yeah.
And we flew across, and then coming into Casablanca, I remember circling in over some islands, and I don't know which ones they were anymore now, but I was so impressed looking down, and it was so green and lush, and all the hillsides were terraced, and I thought, gee, what a beautiful spot this is. Well, we went to Casablanca, and we're there for quite a while, and well, the only thing, mostly the thing I remember about Casablanca, the streets were just dirt and straight, but some of the architecture was real modern. I was really surprised. The apartment buildings and all were really modern. But what I remember most were these olive-skinned girls riding bicycles with their shorts on. That was pretty interesting.
Yeah.
And but it come time to leave there, and from just going to North Africa, we had the C-47, a little two-engine airplane, and I can remember getting on the plane. We taxied down to the other runway. You know, in the old prop planes, they always geared it up and everything before you take off. Well, they were gearing it up the end of the runway, and they didn't like something about it, so we taxied back to the garage there, and they tinkered with it. And then we taxied back down to the end of the runway. They tried it again, and they still didn't like it. So we taxied back down, and they worked on it again. And so this time we took off, and we got gone about 10 or 15 minutes, and they didn't like something. We turned around and went back and landed again. Well, that was all just kind of interesting. And but then the next time we took off, and we stayed, and we had a break in the middle. I don't know, it was maybe Tripoli, I don't know, someplace along there. But it was in the middle of the afternoon and hotter than blazes. Oh, golly, it was hot. We had a little sandwich or something there.
Now, during this journey, at any point did they tell you where you were going, or did you still not know where you were going?
I still didn't know.
Wow.
I didn't know until I got there.
Wow.
And so then we took off, and the next stop was Cairo. And I can remember the crews in the plane were really nice to us. And like I think I mentioned when we went over Boston, we could see the light. Did I mention that? Oh, after we took off from New York, why, of course, it was like 8 o'clock or something at night there, and we flew over Boston. And again, this is my first time on an airplane.
Yeah.
And the pilot invited some of us to come up to the cabin, and I remember flying over Boston with all the lights down there. So then, let's see, we headed to Cairo. And, coming into Cairo, two different things. One thing was I remember flying over Benghazi. Well, Benghazi stuck in my mind because early in the war, the Germans had just about overrun Africa. They had control of most of it. And the British finally made a stand at Benghazi, and so that ended that. That's why that's so stuck in my mind. But then when we got to the near Cairo, he flew over to the pyramids and things there, so we could see that. We landed there, and I was there for probably about a week. And I didn't, some of the guys did go out sightseeing, but I just didn't. I just stayed there and played cards in the tent. So then we took off from Cairo to Karachi. And I can remember flying there, and we flew right over the Suez Canal and the Red Sea, and I couldn't forget the Bible verse about parting the seas as we went over there. So we landed in Karachi, and we had nice quarters there. I think they were brick buildings, but what it turns out, they were the old permanent quarters for the British 8th Artillery. And so that was pretty nice. And we could go downtown. And I remember going downtown once with some friends, and they were telling me they'd just been over here and watching one of them with a flute making the snake stand up like that. Now, I didn't see that, but he said he saw that. I did hear the flutes. But then shortly after that, I came down with diarrhea or dysentery or something like that and had to go to the hospital. And I was in the hospital. I recovered kind of slowly there. And I got concerned that my outfit would move out and I'd be stuck there, and hard to tell where I would end up then. And I got kind of worried about that. But when it come time to go, my commanding officer came and got me discharged. So I went on with my group. I was thankful for that. So we went through northern India by train. And that was about a 5-day trip across there. And we were in hard class, which meant just a wooden bench to sit on. And so we tried to take our rigs and kind of take turns stretching out on those benches as we went across there. And of course, I remember also whenever we'd stop, all the little black kids there, and some older ones too, wanting candy, wanting to throw candy to them and all that. And one other thing I remember, in fact, I kept looking, I guess for that, other thing I can remember, we came to Lahore, which is in the vicinity of New Delta, I think. And it's a huge place. And we had to change trains there. It was about 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning. And it was just jammed with people at that time of day. And I was always thought, boy, we could get lost here easily changing trains. But everything went all right. And then we went on from there. And I can remember in less populated areas seeing the monkeys swinging in the trees. We went there. And we ended up at Calcutta and didn't know how long we'd be there, but we were housed in a sort of, but not an apartment building, but it's several stories with rooms like a hotel. And we were told that had been an orphanage. And at the time I didn't know any difference, but thinking back on it, I kind of think that might be where Mother Teresa had been located, because it was right downtown and been an orphanage. So I don't know that, but I always suspected maybe that was it. But let's see. I believe it's in Calcutta. I remember seeing the Ganges River and see them dipping down in that river, which didn't look very appetizing to me. And let's see, is there anything? Well,
And?
well, then we took off from there back up into Assam province. And the next thing I remember, some narrow gauge railroads, and some of them were different. You had to make a lot of changes to get up there. But we ended up in LaGuardia, oh golly.
Gahati?
Huh?
Gahati?
Gahati, that's it. And I remember crossing the Gahati River on a ferry, and it was a big river. In fact, I've got a couple of pictures on that river. But then we landed in Gahati, and we trucked into the mountains. We still didn't know where we're going, but we were going into the mountains in the truck. And then the main unit there was what they called it was a rebooting, I think.
Remounting.
Huh? Remount, that's it, remount. And then there was a veterans detachment there and a medical detachment, and I was in the medical detachment.
Now, when you went over, were you going over as a replacement, or was a whole unit?
It's a new unit.
Oh, okay. So you went as a unit, not as a replacement.
No,
Okay.
no, it was a new unit. And the first night we were there, the veterinarians had been there for quite a while, and they kind of had their camp all set up. But they had a spot for us and stayed with them at night, and we go back over to our place in the daytime to work on setting up our tents and getting our everything ready there. And so eventually we moved there, and as a dispensary or a medical unit, and the Remount people, the horse people, took care of the horses. At one time, I was told they had as many as 1,800 head of horses and mules there.
Wow.
And what I understood they were doing was they were flying over the hump to China, and that was called the Aluminum Highway, because so many planes were down there. And I think that we've before this we've got some books on that, and there's in one of the books a picture of them loading these horses into the airplanes.
Wow.
And I think.
So, what were conditions like in the camp there? You were up in the mountains. Was it a jungle setting, or what was the setting of your camp?
It wasn't bad at all.
Yeah.
I really liked it there.
Yeah.
In fact, I thought at the time, boy, if we had this near the U.S., it would be a tremendous tourist attraction.
Really, yeah.
There was the mountains there, and we were high enough. I think we were about 7,000 feet, and so it wasn't terribly hot. In fact, in the wintertime, occasionally we would get a little frost. We probably would have gotten snow, but wintertime is their dry season.
Oh, okay.
Their wet season is the monsoons in the summertime. And eventually we even fixed up an amphitheater there, can get movies brought in, have movies.
Wow.
That was a big night. But kind of a interesting coincidence, the USO tours never got up our way. We didn't see any except one, and that was really made an impression. They didn't get to our camp. I didn't get to see, but they were at least in our area, and that was
Jinx Falkenberg.
Falkenberg. And so I've always kind of a soft spot in my heart for coming up to that area there. And the coincidence is, living in Boulder, my wife got acquainted with a lady through another friend, and it turns out that he was Jink Falkenberg's brother.
Is that right?
Yeah, that's quite a
Yeah,
coincidence.
hell yeah.
Let's see.
Well, talk a little bit, Nate, about life in the camp. What your living conditions are like, how the food was, just a rough day-to-day in the
Okay.
life of the camp.
Well, there was 4 of us in a tent, and these were British tents, and they were much better than ours. You had the main tent, and then they had a covering that went over it to get kind of circulation there, and they were much cooler. We had wild animals there. In fact, I can remember at night, we called them jackals. They're kind of like a coyote, and our camp was kind of on the banks of kind of a little ravine, and there was kind of a stream down there, and we could hear those jackals going all night long. And sometimes we could feel animals, I don't know what they were, sniffing around our tent.
Oh, jeez.
And I can remember one night, I was just laying there, and I hear this sniffing, and pretty soon I felt it. See, our beds were kind of 4 posts with just hemp cross wires on them, and I think maybe a little straw ticking on top of that. Well, I felt something pushing under my bed. I could feel it,
Oh, jeez.
and this was in the middle of the night, and I pounded on it and yelled out to my friends, and whatever it was, I don't ever know what it was. I suspect it was a jackal, but I don't know. Got him out of there.
Oh, jeez.
And then I can remember later after we were there, we requisitioned and got what they call a hospital tent. It was a larger tent where we could put people in there. We could bed down, I think, about 8 people there. And we had what we called CQ, charge of quarters, and we would take turns being the charge of quarters, which meant you'd be the first responser if something else. Well, at night you had to sleep down that big tent, and I always felt uncomfortable down, could hear things sniffing around the tent there, being there all by yourself in the dark. But no incidents occurred there, except that one of the problems with so many horses and mules, it was a real target for the Bengal tigers.
Oh, wow.
And they would come in there, and I think eventually they had to set up a kind of a patrol, a guard there to protect the animals. But I was told of one case where a tiger killed a horse and then drug it clear up on the hillside to devour it. Now, it takes a lot of strength to do that. And another fellow from a neighboring unit, I was told that he'd been hunting tigers, and he got clawed by a tiger and was clawed pretty bad. They shipped him out. There was a basic hospital down in
Gahati.
Gahati, right. And I understand that he ended up being shipped back to the U.S. He was hurt so bad.
Wow.
And
Dad, there was a story to tell about when you went out hiking.
oh, right after we got there, and again, it was kind of pretty country. I liked it. I come from Oregon,
Yeah.
so I kind of felt at home there.
Right.
And my friend Pete and I had an afternoon off. We decided to take a little hike up in just the hills, not a long one.
Yeah.
We took a little hike, and we came back, and I sat on my bunk, and I looked down. I was just covered with leeches. Just covered with, and I shook them all off real fast. And reading some of these books, I understand that these leeches, when they bite into you, then they can inject fluid to keep the blood from coagulating so they can suck out more. But I didn't have any serious fights, but I didn't go on any more hikes.
You're right.
No, but it was quite a problem with the horses and mules. That's one of their big treatments. And then, of course, during monsoon season, it was raining a lot and got really muddy and so on. But one of the cowboys became kind of a friend. He had his favorite horse, and he would bring it around occasionally and go horseback riding, into the hills. And that was kind of nice. I got a picture of that, too, around here someplace. And the horse's name was Tanglefoot. And so...
Would you have much interaction with the local natives at all?
Yes, quite a bit. Because just like in MASH, when they found out who we were, we got a lot of them, and we treated them, too.
Yeah.
I was told one fellow, and I suspect a lot of them on their legs, they probably is from these leeches, I don't know, but that he'd walk 17 miles to come to our place. And but we had quite a few of those, got pretty well acquainted with the local community around there. Something else I remember, and I wish I'd had a picture of that, is the women with the loads they carried on their heads, just huge loads. And the other thing was, so many of the women there chewed betel nut, and it's kind of like a chewing tobacco, and they chew that and be on the outside of the lips. So it was not very inviting.
Wow.
And
Well, did you ever think? I mean, here's this small town boy from Oregon, and as I listened to your trip, just getting there, and then once you're there, it was almost like you were in a National Geographic magazine. It had to be just mind-boggling at some point.
yes, it did. Yeah, it was quite a bit.
And what was your responsibility there? Were they bringing the wounded back over the hump, or from local fighting, or what was?
No, we treated them there if we could, but we didn't have any nurses there. What we had is a surgeon, a dentist, and then 7 enlisted people there.
Oh, so you were just a small unit then?
Yeah, it was just a small unit.
Yeah.
I don't know how many on the remount part of it, but I guess there are 6 or 7 people there that we treated. And of course, we treated the veterinarians. You ask about the food was okay, but then after we'd been there for a while, we had plenty of veterans there, and they tried to started to try to sample the local meat there. And of course, they could test it all very well, so that was a nice treat. And I might mention about the dentist. One of my friends was the dental assistant to help him, and I had some cavities filled, and what he had to do is stand beside the dentist, and he had a pedal there to pump that to run the drill to grind your teeth.
Oh, boy.
And let's see, any other...
Dad, weren't some of the remount squadron associated with rodeo or something
yes.
like that?
Well, of course, we had quite a detachment of veterans there to take care of the horses, and a lot of them are veterans from the racetracks that been in the United States. And one, he wasn't a veteran, he was kind of a friend of mine in the headquarters unit, and it learned that he was into harness racing. At that time, I didn't even know what harness racing was.
Right, sure.
And I did, one time after I got back home, in some news article, and I remember seeing about him in the news.
Really? Huh?
Right. And, well, I might, when we first got there, there was a diocese there of the Catholic Church, and there was a bishop there, and they had started a cathedral there, and it was just kind of just rafters and beams up there. I was told it had been bombed by the Japanese. I don't know that's true. I just kind of thought they'd started it and run out of money, but I don't know the answer to that. But we would go to church up there on Sunday, and there would be maybe 40 or so of us that would go up there. And one thing that really impressed me about that, at that time, the Mass was in Latin, and we would be there, and the Latin phrases, they would be having the same phrases with their interpretation as we did. And that I could just feel the kind of growing together, the sharing this one thing together. It was really noticeable. And then they had priests go out from there to deliver communion and services to the little villages around there. And they had to walk all that distance. And one of the priests was telling, we got quite acquainted with one of them. It was the same one, eventually arranged to go up and get him and bring him down, and we had Mass in the rec room. But he said that, a priest lasts on this duty for about 5 years, and that's all. And there was tigers to contend with, and I think you said something in your question about smell. There was a smell, and it wasn't a bad body odor, but it was a particular smell. I always attributed it to smoke from the fires they had in their places. But the priests would smell the same way when they came by because they'd been there with them. And when the war was over, in fact, I read something in the books that all told, transporting those animals by air, they transported about 1,600 horses and mules. And I'd heard just from our fellows there that one time they had about 1,800 there. And when the war was over, we had about 200 left. So those two figures jibed pretty well. And there was originally the Burma Road, and the Japanese cut that Burma Road. And General Stilwell thought we needed a road to China, because China was on our side at that time. And so he started constructing what was known as the Lido Road. And when that route was all open, they offered a bronze medal if you'd volunteer to drive that road the first time.
Oh, wow.
And of our little group of 7, one fellow volunteered. But he'd been a truck driver in civilian life. I had thought about volunteering for that, but at that time I didn't even have a car. My driving experience was very limited, and I thought, well, that's not the right place to learn it. So I didn't, but he made it up there and back, and let's see, what else?
What was it? Talk a little bit about communication. I mean, it sounded like you were pretty isolated.
Yes,
well,
we were.
How were you getting word about what was going on in the world with news and from home, and talk about mail and?
Well, one fellow, we had these semi-trucks like you see around here now, hauling sheep and things like that. That's what we hauled the horses in. And they would come from, I don't know where they came from, but they would truck them up to our place, and take care of them, and then truck them to, not Chabo, I'm sorry on this, I can't remember.
That's fine.
An air place where the planes left over to go across the hump. And, also, a mail came into Gauhati, so he drove down to Gauhati every day to get the mail and bring it back. And we did have a landline telephone. We could call the other units on the telephone, but as far as I know, we couldn't call out of the camp there. but we did have that. And
Was the mail pretty reliable? I mean, getting letters
yeah,
from home?
it was
Yeah.
pretty good.
Yeah? Yeah.
I kind of think of any incidents while we were there.
And that's how you would get your news too, as far as how the war was going, or baseball scores from home, or that was your link to the outside world, was mail?
That was our link, right?
Wow. Wow.
And I think your instructors talked about for entertainment.
Yeah.
Why our main entertainment, we ordered and we finally got a net and some balls and played volleyball. And gee, I really enjoyed that. That was really great. And then when things kind of settled down, a town called Shillong was about a couple of thousand feet higher than we were, and I don't know how many miles, it sticks in my mind, maybe 9 miles. There was a little single road that went up there, and they had gates at each end, and the gatekeeper there, and they controlled the traffic on this road so you wouldn't meet somebody along the road and go back and forth. Well, the British, it was a British protectorate then, and they had quite a nice facility there in Shillong, and they had a nice clubhouse, and towards the end, they kind of opened that on Tuesday nights, and the local girls could come in, we could dance with them. Well, that was a big social event.
Uh-huh.
And there was one girl there that I really took a fancy to. She was really a beautiful girl, tall, black hair, long dress, red. And I thought when I got there, gee, I got to try and dance with her. You know, the girls would sit around and the men would go and ask them to dance. So I went over and asked her if she would dance. She says, yes, you'll be number 7. So I waited to number 7. And sure enough, we danced. And gee, we got along really well. And I wasn't familiar with the tango at that time, but they liked to play a lot of tangos. So we worked out some kind, I don't know if it's official dance for it, but we worked out some steps, and I really enjoyed that.
Oh, wow.
Well, I was told that she was from what they call the Naga Hills. And the Naga Hills, I was told, had headhunters. And that was confirmed when these books are really, that was still possible. In fact, the later road kind of went through that area. And so I dated her a couple of times. It was kind of hard because I didn't have any transportation and she was that distant. But maybe a couple of times, I don't know. And I might just mention the water.
Yeah.
The water, we had water there, but we had to decontaminate it. And what we had was a Lister bag, and we'd put chlorine tablets in there to purify it. And it was just hanging there, and so it kind of ventilated, so it stayed kind of cool.
Did you ever have any problems with the local diseases, the malarias, anything associated with the jungle? I mean,
No, we didn't.
Yeah.
Wasn't too much close contact with them, and I think we were a little bit too high for malaria.
Okay.
Although we did take all the precautions. We had the nets we put over our bunks and stuff to put on our arms and things, but we didn't. But speaking of malaria, kind of a interesting, this is out of line, but after we came back, we were taking the train from California up to Fort Lewis to be discharged, and it was a troop train. And you see, I was a medic, so about 10 or 11 o'clock at night, the conductor came to me, and I guess somehow he found out I was a medic, and he says, has a real sick man in the next car. would I come and take a look at him? Well, I did, and his temperature was well over 104. And I started asking him, and we all took Atabrine, but Atabrine doesn't clear malaria. It just keeps you from having these symptoms.
Oh, wow.
And when on our base camp, we didn't have any malaria. I'd never treated malaria. I told the conductor he's been off Atabrine, and so he's having one of these feverish spells that occur ever so often if you have malaria. And I think that's what it is. And he says, well, do you think we should call a doctor? And I says, well, if that's possible, because I thought to myself, gee, if I misdiagnosed this, I didn't want to have to live with that the rest of my life. So if he's willing to stop the train, I'll say that. So we did. He agreed with the diagnosis, and the fellow was better the next day. That's kind of a side.
Yeah, yeah. So then how long were you in India then, overseas?
About 18 months.
Wow, wow.
And, well, we had the monsoons, but they weren't as severe as they're apparently having in South India right now. They're having bad floods and things there. It rained a lot, but we didn't get any of these big, heavy downpours day after day after day. But all our shoes and everything would be green with mold.
How did you keep your feet dry and not get problems with your feet? then?
Jungle rot.
Yeah.
You didn't get jungle rot?
What?
You never got jungle rot?
No, I didn't have any.
Yeah.
No.
Were you always wearing boot type shoes?
Right. Even when I was working in the hospital. Here we had our white uniforms and these kind of boot type shoes.
Oh, I didn't realize that you wore white uniforms in the hospital too.
Pardon?
I hadn't realized that you had a white uniform to wear
In the hospital I did, yes. In
How did
India
you-
we just wore our regular military clothes.
How did your laundry get done?
Oh, they had a laundry, so when they get dirty I just turn it in and they would give me a fresh one. I'd walk out with a fresh one.
Wow.
A lot of people overseas would have like a tent boy. Did you have any locals that come in and clean your tent or take care of?
Oh, well, that was what I mentioned. That was for the uniform. In India, we were on our own, but we had local people, and in fact, we had stenciled in our uniforms the last four numbers of our serial number. We turn that over to them, and they beat them on the rocks, to clean them.
Wow. Oh, jeez.
But they did a nice job. I had no complaints about that.
You remember the day you heard about VJ Day when the war was finally over?
Well, yes, I kind of remember that. But where we were, well, on VJ Day, well, we could think maybe we'll be going home soon.
Yeah, I'll bet.
And that was kind of nice. Everybody was in pretty good mood.
Sure, yeah. How much longer then after VJ Day did you finally pack up and start for home then?
Well, VJ Day was in July or August.
Just this time of year in August,
Yeah.
yeah.
And then we left in February.
So you were there that much longer then?
Right,
Wow.
right. And